All right, so welcome everyone. For our very first deep dive, we're going to be looking into a story that just seems to keep coming back up.
A story with twists and turns you wouldn't believe.
Exactly. And it's one you guys, our listeners, suggested. The Menendez brothers.
Oh, yeah, this one's a classic.
I mean, just think about it. Money, mansions, murder.
And that's just the beginning. We've got court transcripts, news articles, and even
TikToks.
Seriously.
Oh, yeah. People on TikTok have some wild theories. But really, when you get down to it, it's a question that's been plaguing us for decades. Were Lyle and Erik Menendez cold-blooded, driven by greed?
Or were they victims? Victims pushed to a point where they felt they have no other choice.
Right. To really unpack all of that, we have to go back. Back to the beginning. We're talking Beverly Hills, a wealthy family.
The American dream, right.
On the surface, absolutely. Jose Menendez, a successful entertainment executive.
Big time.
His wife, Katie, they had it all. The mansion, the cars, the lifestyle. But then, August 20th, 1989, everything changes. Jose and Kitty are found murdered in their own home, brutally shot.
And it's their sons, Lyle and Erik, who call the police. They tell the officers they were out at the movies.
Came home to this horrifying scene.
Now, initially, the brothers weren't considered suspects. They were grieving sons, or so it seemed.
But then, things start to get a little suspicious.
A little, yeah. We're talking about a Porsche, a tennis coach, designer clothes, trips.
Let's just say they weren't exactly pinching pennies.
Right. This spending spree is what really raised those first red flags for investigators. It just didn't add up.
And then comes the real turning point in this case. Erik's confession.
Now, this wasn't a confession to the police. Erik was seeing a therapist, a Dr. Jerome Oziel.
And during those sections, Erik spills everything.
He confesses to the murders.
Yeah.
But there's a twist. This confession, it wasn't supposed to be public.
So how did it get out?
Well, this is where things get really interesting, legally speaking.
Yeah.
California, they have pretty strict doctor-patient confidentiality. But there are exceptions.
Exceptions like what?
Well, in this case, it was argued that there was a threat made against Dr. Oziel. And because of that threat, the confession became admissible in court.
So imagine you're the defense team. Your client has confessed. This confession is now public.
Talk about an uphill battle.
What do you do?
Well, they went with a completely different narrative, a narrative of abuse.
Abuse.
The defense argued that Lyle and Erik had endured years of horrific abuse, both physical and sexual, primarily from their father.
And that this abuse, this constant fear, led them to believe
that their parents were going to kill them, that they acted in self-defense.
It was a shocking claim, and it clearly resonated with the public because the first trial...
2 juries, unable to reach a verdict, deadlocked.
That's huge. But then a second trial was ordered.
And in this second trial, the judge significantly limited the amount of testimony allowed about the alleged abuse.
So the jury was presented with a more streamlined version of events.
And the verdict: guilty. Both brothers sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And for a long time, that seemed to be the end of the story.
Right. They served their time, separated at first, but eventually reunited in 2018 at a facility in California.
But then, in 2023, another twist.
A big one. A former member of Menudo.
That's the boy band, right?
Yep. He comes forward and alleges that he was abused by Jose Menendez.
Wow, that's a bombshell.
Totally reignited the entire debate. People started asking, what if this information had come out during the trials?
Would it have changed the outcome?
It's hard to say. It definitely adds a whole other layer to an already incredibly complicated case. And it's led to calls for the brothers' sentences to be reviewed.
Which brings us to, I think, the most recent development. The Los Angeles DA, George Gascon, has filed a petition to resentence Lyle and Erik.
This big. Gascon's argument hinges on California's youth offender laws. He's basically saying because of their ages at the time of the crime, their sentences could be reduced.
Potentially even making them eligible for parole.
Now, obviously, this is a controversial move. I mean, this case has been debated for decades, and now we're right back to those same questions.
Were they driven by greed, or were they victims pushed to the edge?
Right, and it's a question that each of us has to grapple with.
So what do you think? After hearing all of this, do you believe Lyle and Erik Menendez should be released? We want to hear your thoughts. Head to our social media, use the hashtag Menendez Deep Dive, and let us know what you think. We'll be reading your comments.
And while you're there, tell us. What other mysteries or historical events would you like to explore next week? What should we deep dive into next?
We'll see you then.